following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back. Throneberry Fields forever. I'm Ralph Tycho with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and I am privileged to introduce the host, Jeff Kallman. Jeff, how are you, sir?
So far, so good, Ralph.
We're just starting out. Stay that way. Keep it going. We talked off the air a little bit. I have to fill the audience in. Your voice is a dead ringer to me for the late, great Bert Sugar.
I'll take that as a high compliment, even though I'm not that enthusiastic about the sport he's remembered best for, if you can call it a sport.
Right. Well, it is what it is, but it is certainly wasn't what it was when Bert Sugar covered it. And you could talk about it being barbaric, and you wouldn't be far off. You could talk about it being an athletic skill that unto its own, and you wouldn't be far off. It's a lot of.
You can talk about it as two men or women these days going into a ring, trying to put each other into a coma, and not be far off.
No. You're absolutely right, and I don't see the future of it. When I say the future,
it's hard enough seeing its past.
Yeah, I see 15, 20 years from now, they won't be talking about it. But it does compel people to listen when there's a big fight going on.
And multiple vehicle road wrecks compel people to watch, too.
You're absolutely right. It's that craning neck when you're out there on the road and you don't want to look, but something makes you. Or there are people that can just put it in a compartment and ignore it completely. So. Everybody's different, but Bert Sugar had a distinctive voice, and he, like yourself, in whatever sport you guys cover, you baseball, he boxing, total maven. You amaze me regularly, my friend. So
I appreciate that. I rather like being amazing.
Yeah, well, yes. I don't know if you're amazing with the apostrophe, because that would be Met-like, 1969 Met-like, and this is the year.
I was more amazed in terms of 1962 Met-like.
Yeah, the Amazing. You're right, but they still were known as the Amazons when they won in '69, and I will have to say that was amazing. Looking back, wow. In 7 short years, they went from the absolute worst baseball team that ever was, really. And when you play them on a sim game and you just put the statistics in, it doesn't show how horrible they were. They found ways to lose that were incredible, and that's what you remember. But on the flip side of the Amazons, if you go to the '69 team, they found ways to win that were just as amazing. And
they weren't as far off. They actually were not. I did a little looking into this about a week or so ago in anticipation of Wayne Coffey's new book about the 1969 Mets. Is coming out at the end of March, and I bought the book on a pre-order. It's called They Said It Couldn't Be Done. And I noticed something about the 1969 Mets versus the 1969 Orioles. When you looked at their each team's regulars and those reserves who played in 60 games or more, you find out a few similar things. The Mets, their regulars and their 60-plus game reserve players, they created 40 runs per 162 games and 4 runs per 27 outs. The Orioles created 67 runs per 162 games, but they created 5 runs per 27 outs. And the Mets, those same players, the Mets used 6 and change outs per run created. The Orioles used 5.5 outs per run created. Now, the Orioles looked a lot more intimidating because they had a few more future Hall of Famers in their lineup than the Mets. But when you broke it down, they weren't as far off as people really suggested at the time. Now, all this is with a good look at deeper statistics and hindsight. And of course, the real key was that the Mets had the slightly better pitching when they needed it and better defense, especially in the outfield. But they were not as much of a mismatch as people really thought. The Mets looked that way even more so because of their first 8 years.
People never thought Swoboda would come up big because he had a reputation of not being a particularly good outfielder. But by the time
he came up when he had to.
By 69, he was really a super outfielder. He worked hard at it. He was not an natural.
He was better. He was actually better in the postseason in the outfield than he had been in the regular season.
Oh yes,
Agee was one of the league's best defenders all year long.
He wasn't among the best, but he wasn't a weak defender as he had been when he came up in the early years with the Mets, and he just really wasn't good for a while.
For openers, he wasn't there in the early years of the Mets. The Mets got him in a trade for the 1968 season, and he'd been a Rookie of the Year with the White Sox. He was a good center fielder.
No, you're talking about Agee.
I'm talking about Tommy Agee.
Yes, Swoboda was there in the early years and did improve his defense quite a bit. But yes, Tommy Agee was a terrific acquisition. Although the first year they got him, he didn't seem to be panning out, and stuck with him.
Agee needed a year, I think, to assimilate himself to the Mets, and he found a patron in Gil Hodges. Apparently, Bill James told this story in his historical baseball abstract. Agee was the kind of a player who needed to vent for assorted reasons, and Gil Hodges let him do that. He often is not letting Agee sit in his office and vent for as much as half an hour at a time.
Really?
Yeah.
See,
a lot of players don't need something like that, but Agee did, and Hodges was willing to let him have it. He knew that was going to help Agee relax more at the plate and in the field. I mean, how many times can you think of a leadoff hitter leading his team and runs batted in on a season? But that's what Agee did with the 1969 Mets.
Whoa, that's interesting. They had quite a lineup. I think Boswell pretty much batted second most of the time. Cleon Jones.
Agee led off and Boswell batted second.
Yeah. And Cleon Jones third. I'd say Swoboda, maybe Clendenin, depending on who was.
Cleon Jones had a career year on the regular season, but in the World Series, he was more valuable defensively than he was at the plate. As a matter of fact, in the 1969 World Series, Cleon Jones went over 10 with men on base. But he was a lot more valuable in the outfield in that series.
And speaking of new books coming out about the Mets and Cleon Jones, Art Shamsky, one of the real terrific human beings in baseball and out of baseball, wrote a book, as did Coffey, about those years, and he clears up a lot of misconceptions about Cleon and Gil Hodges. And when Gil Hodges came out to get him, he wasn't intending originally to take him out.
No, but he went out to see. I think I've always read it as this: he went out to see if Jones might have been injured, and Jones did admit that he wasn't feeling comfortable, and that's when Hodges took him out. And Hodges himself later said he didn't even realize what he'd done until he was on the way back to the dugout and across the infield.
Right, and
everybody took it to mean that Hodges walked out personally to pull a fielder who was loafing, but Jones may have been hurting.
Yeah,
he said as much to Hodges, and Hodges apparently said, if you're hurting, you should come on out.
Right, and Jones has also led an impeccable life of service to his community, of being a counselor and a terrific human being after baseball. And it's nice to know, because those two things were, the Hodges taking him out really played havoc with how we remembered him over the years. And
that's because that was completely misinterpreted.
Right. And there was something in Shamsky's book where Hodges just kept walking past the pitcher's mound, didn't really mean to do that. And he was just kind of in a fog himself that day. So it's good that Cleon has led a terrific life. And that clears a little up. You know, he hit 343 that year. Am I correct on that?
I think you are.
That seems to stick in my head. If not 343, 323, had a hell of a year. And certainly without him, there's no World Series.
It was definitely his career year.
Yeah.
No question about it. He put everything that he had together.
Yeah.
And in 1969, he hit 340 exactly.
Whoa, I was right.
That was his career year.
Yeah. And you know what? They also got a very good third base combination in Garrett's brother. Wayne Garrett.
Wayne Garrett.
Wayne Garrett had a brother.
He wasn't much of a hitter, but he was an excellent third baseman that year.
Excellent third baseman, and he and the glider kind of did the job over at third. Believe it or not, they'd been in existence for 7 years. Third base was always a problem until comes along Wayne Garrett. He was about as solid as they got. They started with Don Zimmer. They got Cliff Cook, and it went downhill from there for a long time. And naturally, Harrelson had already been mentored by Roy McMillan and was absolutely solid at shortstop. Boswell, we talked about, very solid guy. Nothing spectacular in the field, but nothing horrible, and was the perfect number 2 hitter. So we have a lot.
He was good. He was good number 2.
Yeah.
In that
absolutely.
Lineup.
Absolutely. It was not an overpowering team, but like you say, they were better defensively, especially in the outfield, than Baltimore. In the infield, any team with Brooks Robinson, you have to say, I'll take my hat off to them. To him.
Brooks Robinson and Mark Belanger at shortstop.
Right, that was quite a left.
Mark
left
Belanger is kind of the Clete Boyer of shortstops. If he could hit even a little bit, he'd be in the Hall of Fame, just as is the case with Boyer at third base.
Absolutely. He was a terrific third baseman in a city that kept giving birth to great third basemen. You could start with a guy who I really never saw. I saw him as a kid, a very young kid, but the Dodgers had a third baseman that, yes, he
for
was,
about 3 or 4 years, he may have been the best defensive third baseman in the National League.
Right, and Boyer, even though Brooks Robinson,
Clete Boyer couldn't hit a lick, but he is arguably the best fielding third baseman who ever played the game.
Yeah, I will agree with you.
And Brooks Robinson.
Including Brooks Robinson. And he could have been a regular shortstop. Kubek came up.
The Yankees first looked at him at shortstop. I don't know if you knew that.
No.
Clete Boyer, when he first came to the Yankees.
From Kansas City, they told him to draft Boyer because he was a bonus baby, and they had a working relationship with Arnold Johnson, and they had Arnold Johnson sign him to a bonus contract. But you know what that meant, of course, but maybe the audience doesn't. In those days, if you gave a guy over X number of dollars, you had to keep him on the bench for like 2 years. Sandy Koufax was one of those.
Al Kallman, Harmon Killebrew, there were a lot of them.
Right. God, the Yankees were smart. George Weiss was a frickin' genius. He has Kansas City sign him, sit him on the bench, and then trade him to the Yankees.
They looked at Boyer at shortstop as well, too, because they got him at around about the time that Phil Rizzuto's career was ending. But Boyer had a throwing arm that was adaptable at either short or third, and they had Tony Kubek in the system ready to come up to play shortstop, so they had Boyer at third. And Boyer at third was an acrobat with the arm and with the glove.
Coming up, and Phil Linz.
Mm-hmm.
So they were something.
And I think the problem was, if people had looked more objectively between Brooks Robinson and Clete Boyer, I think Boyer would have won quite a few of the Gold Gloves that Robinson won.
Right.
The problem was this: Brooks Robinson could hit a little bit. Clete Boyer couldn't hit with a garage door.
Right. But later went on to Atlanta and had over 20 home runs.
It was a fluke season for him.
Yeah.
He had over 20 home runs, and he had an on-base percentage under 300.
Whoa, I didn't know that.
Well, Bobby Richardson did not have a great on-base percentage either. There was one reason only why the Yankees poked him in the leadoff spot, and that was because he was a tough strikeout.
Oh.
He was one of the toughest strikeouts in the American League. That was why they led off with him, with a player who otherwise had an almost sub-300 on-base percentage lifetime.
Yeah, and they didn't have many choices at leadoff in that lineup. Everybody was a slugger.
Not necessarily true. I'm going to tell you that I think if you put them in an objective light, Tony Kubek would have been a slightly better leadoff option. He was a tough strikeout in his own right, and he had a better on-base percentage.
You know, when I play simulated baseball, I lead off with him against a right-handed pitcher, and I bat Richardson down the lineup, and I'll even put Boyer in the second position, because Richardson was not necessarily a great leadoff man. But
no, like I said, the main reason he got the job, I think, is because he was an impossible strikeout.
Yeah. Okay. That definitely makes sense to me.
He was a fine fielding second baseman, but the fact that he was so tough to strike out was the only reason to put him in the leadoff spot.
Yeah, he was as good a fielding second baseman as anybody but maybe Nellie Fox in the American League back then. Nellie Fox was great. He and Aparicio were so smooth, and they led them to that 59 pennant because they were a weak team, had a weak lineup, and Aparicio.
They were stronger than people think. They had solid pitching,
and they were strong up the middle. They were strong.
They were strong defensively. They had solid pitching, and
they were third. Bubba Phillips, if I remember correctly. A lot of guys playing.
He was serviceable.
Earl Torgerson.
Yeah, they didn't have a lot of power. What they were good at was getting on base.
Right. And Sherm Lala was a terrific catcher too, and Landis was great defensively. So, like I say, strong up the middle will get you by.
It did with the 1959 White Sox.
Right. That was a great pennant race. You had Cleveland at the top of their game with one of the most interesting outfields of all time, Cleveland.
The underrated part of the 1959 White Sox was their bullpen.
Yes.
They had a bullpen almost equal to that of the Dodgers. They had Jerry Staley in what we'd call the closer slot now, and he had a 2.24 ERA and a 2.82 fielding independent ERA, and he had 15 saves that year. And Turk Lone, another relief pitcher, had 15 saves as well and a sub-3 ERA. I think the White Sox bullpen was their most underrated.
Mention a statistic that I'm not fully aware of
fielding independent?
familiar with. Would you explain to our audience the...
Yes, fielding independent pitching is basically your ERA when the defense behind you is removed from the equation. It accounts for everything that a pitcher himself can control. It accounts for his strikeouts. It factors in his strikeouts, his walks, and whether he's missing bats. But it takes the fielding out of the equation. So if you have, I mentioned Jerry Staley. As a matter of fact, Staley that year had the lowest FIP on the White Sox pitching staff at 2.82. That says that Jerry Staley was the best pitcher on the staff when it came to the things he could control, like striking out hitters versus walking them.
Right.
And come to think of it, he also had the best strikeout-to-walk ratio on the staff. He had a 2.16 strikeout-to-walk rate that year.
Yeah.
Jerry Staley may have been the White Sox secret weapon in 1959.
Let me. You're such a numbers whiz. Were you into math before baseball as a kid?
I was the worst math student in school. My God. I didn't become anything of a math maven to any degree until I got deeper into baseball and began getting curious about statistics.
Interesting. Did you get those statistics from the back of baseball cards? Did you learn baseball that way?
You started that way. Then you looked at things like the Baseball Encyclopedia and Total Baseball, and you started getting deeper. And then I'd be reading things like the Bill James Baseball Abstract and the Elias Sports Analyst, and go even deeper in those directions.
Okay. Now, I know you were a Met fan, of course, but what were you before the Mets came into existence, or were you just too young?
I was probably just too young. I didn't start really becoming aware of watching baseball until probably 1961, when the Yankees and the Reds met in the World Series.
Okay. Remember
I
that
mean,
well?
I was when I was a little kid. Even when I was a little kid, I liked playing the game, but I wasn't aware of pro baseball until around about then, 1961.
And how old were you?
I was, and that during the season, I was just short of my 6th birthday.
Okay. Now, which team did you, of all the Met teams, which was your favorite? Mine was 73. They were so overachieving then. What was yours?
In pure baseball terms, I would have to say it's a toss-up between the 1969 Mets and the mid to late 80s Mets.
Okay. And I'll ask you the $64,000 question. Do you think they have enough to be solid contenders all year this year?
I think they do. I think they're a lot more solid than people think. Remember, they had a very active off-season. The new general manager, Brodie Van Wenigen, was very active and was rolling some very serious dice.
Okay.
And I think I mentioned this last week, and I'll say it again. I think this year's National League East is going to be a 14 dogfight. It's going to be between the Phillies, the Nationals, the Mets, and the Braves.
Yeah, and it's going to determine.
It could even theoretically go right down to the last week.
It's going to determine who beats up on the Marlins the most, and they may surprise.
It's not just going to be a question of who beats up on the Marlins the most. You're talking about 4 teams that are well built, and 4 teams that are going to come out and play very tight and tough. The contest between each other is probably going to matter even more than anything they do or don't do as far as using the Marlins for target practice.
Okay.
Also, watch how
we're looking for.
Also, watch how well these 4 teams do against the other divisions when they play them. How they play each other is going to be primary. How they play the other divisions is going to factor in. But I can see the National League East this year going right down to the last week. And that's as far as I'm going to go, because when it comes to predicting a baseball season, I am a strict adherent of Berra's law.
Okay. Did we talk rule changes last week at all?
We started to, and another one has come into play that got an interesting comment from a fellow who won it 2 years ago. The winner of the Home Run Derby this year is going to receive $1 million, and that happens to be $315,000 or thereabout more than Aaron Judge is going to earn this year. And Aaron Judge went on the record as saying, and I quote, "The money doesn't matter. For me, I did it once. I had a blast with it, but I'm more worried about winning games. I don't want to get hurt again doing a derby." In other words, he's out. Now, what do we mean by hurt? He did have a shoulder issue in 2017. That was the year he won the Derby, but he underwent a cartilage cleanup after the season, and it was revealed the injury may actually have happened to him near the beginning of the year. What hurt even more, I think, and I took a deep look at it, is that winning the Home Run Derby is often is not hazardous to a player's second-half baseball health. There have been 34 Derby champions since it started in 1985. And only one shy of half had lesser first halves than second halves. I'm looking at a table I drew, and I can tell you that out of the 33 winners, there was no Derby in 88 because of rain. They canceled the event. And I didn't look at 1994 because it was a strike year, and that's not really fair to look at the second half of a season because it was abbreviated like that. But at the ones I looked at, just about half of those who won the Derby had lesser second halves, including all 6 Hall of Famers who won home run derbies.
Right. I know. Didn't Bryce Harper suffer terrifically after winning it or going for it?
No, he did not. He won it last year, and he had a way better second half than he did in the first half. His OPS, on base plus slugging, in the first half last year was 833. His second half OPS was 972. Harper is one of the ones who had a better second half. As a matter of fact, I ran it down like this. Ryan Howard had his best season of his career in 2006. He won the Derby that year. His second half OPS had the highest jump of any Derby winner in the second half. His OPS in the second half was 336 points higher than his first half.
Wow. That's interesting that two guys are the exceptions that prove the rule.
And of all the home run champions, only one home run derby champion had the same OPS in the first half as he had in the second half the year he won the derby, and that was Eric Davis in 1989. A 948 OPS before and after the derby.
Just that you may not, this is just a question that popped into my head, and you may know this because you know guys' OPS. What was Musial's OPS like in his career? Was it unbelievably high or lower than we might think it was?
Well, you're talking about an unusual player in that he had the same number of hits at home as he had on the road.
Right.
I don't know if that's the most balanced player in baseball history, but if not, it's awful close. Musial's lifetime OPS was 976. He cracked 1,000, 5, 6, 7, 8 times in his career.
Pretty damn high. He was very, very, of all the absolute superstars, he turns out to be one of the most underrated.
He may be the most balanced of the players whose careers came predominantly after World War II and into the era of integration. It wasn't easy. I mean, you had certain players who were no questions asked great, but they had park factors affecting them. Some of them played in hitters' parks, some in pitchers' parks. The park didn't seem to matter to Stan Musial. He had 3,630 hits lifetime, and exactly half of them were on the road.
That is an unbelievably amazing stat if you think about it. Wow. And two, no one has ever said a bad word about Stan Musial on a personal level. No,
nobody ever did.
Which probably means more than, if you stop to think about it, it means more than stats. It means more than who plays in the majors. It means everything, the kind of person you are. And
one of my favorite stories about Stan Musial is that he agreed to become the Cardinals' general manager for a season, but found it so little to his liking that he handed it back to Bing Devine.
Bing Devine, a football guy and a baseball guy, had success, high-end success in both sports.
And I never understood why the Cardinals fired him during the 1964 season. I mean, they were smart to bring him back, but I never got why they fired him during that season. The team struggled in the middle of the season, but you couldn't put that on Devine.
I wonder how much of an influence Branch Rickey really had on that team.
More than people would probably like to believe. I mean, there were maneuverings going on behind the Cardinals scene that year. There were rumors that Johnny Keane, the manager, was going to be moved out and Leo DeRocher moved in, and Branch Rickey may have had a hand in that. Also, so may have Harry Carey, the broadcaster. And,
oh, really?
Yeah, and at around the same time, the Yankees had a few similar things going involving Yogi Berra his first year managing the team.
Absolutely.
And it actually got to the
team.
Point. It started long before the Phil Linz incident. It was an ongoing thing. Ralph Houck was kicked upstairs to be the general manager, and apparently he kept the back channel open to players who wanted to gripe about Berra for whatever reason. The only problem the Yankees had in 1964 in the first half was that they didn't have anybody reliable in the bullpen.
Right.
Except for Steve Hamilton early in the season. But the back channel maneuverings are even got to a point where Ralph Houck was actively looking for a successor to Berra, and he may actually have reached out to Keene when he heard that the skids were being greased for Keene in St. Louis. And then what happened next upended everybody in baseball. The National League pennant race went down to the last weekend, and the Cardinals came out on top somehow. Then they met the Yankees in the World Series because the Yankees put on a good stretch drive and finally got a bullpen stopper while they were at it, Pedro Ramos. He wasn't eligible for the postseason, but he saved a few key games down the stretch. The Yankees and the Cardinals play a 7-game thriller. The Cardinals come out on top, and the next day both managers are gone. Gussie Busch, the owner of the Cardinals, called a press conference to announce Keene's rehiring, and Keene greeted him by handing him his letter of resignation. Yogi Berra went into the Yankee offices thinking they wanted to talk about preparations for 1965 and came out with his head in a guillotine's basket. And Keene got hired as the new Yankee manager.
And it didn't work out for either team.
No, it didn't. Keene didn't realize he was taking on a white elephant, that the Yankees had come to the end of their line. The key names on the team were old, injured, or both, and the farm system was parched.
They stopped putting money into it.
Keene had no way of knowing. Well, that was to pump up the Yankees' value to sell the team to CBS. But Keene had no way of knowing that he was taking on a white elephant. Plus, the Yankees weren't built for the kind of game Keene managed. Keene managed what was then National League style ball, which was a balance between station to station ball and run production, and the Yankees were built to go for the big inning, and that wasn't Keene's style. It was a mismatch, no matter how you put it.
And there was always the factor of managing or playing in New York. It's a different animal.
Well, I don't think the New York animal bothered Keene as much as the baseball animal did. The Yankees weren't built to the style of baseball he was accustomed to. Plus, like I said, he had no way of knowing when he took the job that he was taking on a white elephant.
Okay.
He was gone early in the 66 season, and that was the year the Yankees went all the way to last place.
Okay. Getting off the subject a little bit, there are a number of free agents that are still out there, and guys who.
It's funny you mention that because before I came aboard,
Gio
there was
Gonzalez.
That's who I was going to talk about. There was a report right before we came aboard today that the Yankees were giving him a little deeper look. It's a possibility.
Wow, that's interesting. I did a Yankee show.
The Yankees need help because Luis Severino is going to be out until May. So the Yankees are maybe looking at a little extra pitching depth.
Yeah,
they could also be looking at Dallas. They could also be looking at Dallas.
Without their pitchers being out for a while, I mean, 2-3 months ago, you could have looked at the Yankees and said they could use Gio Gonzalez. Wonder why it takes teams so long, and is.
Well, before losing Severino, the Yankees, I think, felt they were in good pitching shape because they had fortified a bullpen that was already a pain in the neck to the rest of the league. So if they were thinking all we need is our starters to get to the sixth inning, they had the bullpen to back it up. But now with Severino out until May, that puts them short a starter, and so they may be giving Gonzalez, maybe Dallas Keuchel another look.
Yeah, well, they should have done it. They should have expected someone to go down and gotten deeper, even if they didn't need to be deep. Better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. But they're making up for it.
One of the problems is that even if you can look at a player or a pitcher closely and make a preliminary determination, you really can't predict who's going to get hurt when and how badly.
That's true. So in today's day,
you don't know it. You really can't predict until they start playing a game.
Are going to get hurt.
Yeah.
You almost have to plan for it.
Yeah, but at the same time, because it's such an X factor, there's only so far you can plan.
That's true, and there's the soft cap too. We're not taking into consideration how much money they have or don't have for that,
Well, the Yankees made a point of staying far enough below the so-called competitive balance tax that they have some wiggle room.
Oh, they do. Okay.
They have some wiggle room.
Yeah.
The Dodgers
the
don't
first thing
necessarily,
you think
but the Yankees
when
do.
you think of the Yankees as unlimited spending, these kids are not doing what their dad did. They're much more conservative than one would have expected them to be. And
they're not as peripatetic as their
like
father was. They're not as peripatetic as their father was. I noticed almost from the beginning that neither Hank nor Hal Steinbrenner were as liable to act on a whim as George Steinbrenner was for so often. They're much more measured. Each of them in their own way is quite a bit more deep analysis than their father was. And I think they harked back to what happened when Steinbrenner was forced away from the team in the early 90s. Because he wasn't there to keep his thumb on the scale, they were able to rebuild the entire organization. I think that's what the Steinbrenner children have done. They've rebuilt the organization.
And they certainly have cut down on the tumult.
They're not unwilling to spend. They never have been, but they're not just going to spend on a whim either. Not compared to their father.
True. Hey, this has been another terrific effort. I'm enjoying this. It's effortless. Let's put it that way. We're putting out some pretty good podcasts, young man.
Every time somebody calls me young man, I want to say flattery will get you everywhere.
Okay. You keep being young. Remember, you got to catch up with me.
Oh, I think I'll hold back in that race.
Okay.
I'm not in that big a hurry to get old.
Well, no, but the alternative is certainly worth avoiding.
By all means.
All right. Please do for at least another week, and we will be back at you then. The show is Throneberry Fields Forever. The man himself is Jeff Kallman, and I'm privileged to work with you, sir.
Likewise, my friend. Have a great week.
You too. Adios, everybody. Thank you for listening, and we'll be back at you, like I say, before you know it.
And goodbye for now.
The proceeding was a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production. Thank you for listening.